A poor little boy finds a rusty bicycle in the trash and brings it to Grant Park, where he approaches the most feared Mafia boss in Chicago, sitting alone on a bench. The boy looks at him with innocent green eyes and asks a question that stops the cold-hearted kingpin in his tracks. Every kid in this park has a dad who teaches them how to ride. Can you be my dad just for today? What happens next will change the criminal underworld of Chicago forever. If this story touched your heart, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story. Drop a like to help more people discover this journey, and share it with someone who believes in second chances. Jamie opened his eyes while the sky was still pitch black. He didn't own a clock, but he knew this was the hour when most people were still fast asleep in their warm beds. He lay curled up on the piece of cardboard he called a bed, tucked into the dark alley behind the Little Italy restaurant. The chill of an early autumn morning cut straight through the oversized worn coat he pulled over himself. This coat was the only thing his mother had left him. It hung loosely on his thin 6-year-old frame, yet it kept him warm enough to survive the cold nights. His stomach growled, reminding him that it had been 2 days since he'd eaten a proper meal. Yesterday he had found half a loaf of bread someone had thrown out behind a bakery, and at least it had still been edible. But today, the hunger didn't trouble him as much as it usually did, because today was different. Jamie slowly sat up and looked toward the corner of the alley where a rusted bicycle stood. His eyes lit up in the darkness at the sight of it. He still couldn't quite believe his luck that morning. The small bicycle was just the right size for him. Most of the red paint had peeled away, revealing dull gray metal underneath. The wheels were speckled with rust, and the seat was torn in several places, exposing the yellow foam inside. But what mattered most was that it was whole. It had handlebars to hold, pedals to push, wheels to roll. For the first time in his life, Jamie owned something complete, something that truly worked, something that was entirely his. Before this, when he rummaged through trash bins, he had only found broken pieces, things that were never whole. A doll's arm without a body, toy car wheels without the rest of the car, scattered puzzle pieces that would never come together to form a full picture. But this bicycle was different. It had everything. It was the first thing that made him feel like other children. Jamie stood and walked to the bicycle, running his hand gently along the scratched handlebars. With his other hand, he touched the pocket of his coat, where he kept a small crumpled photograph of his mother. The picture was still there, safe and warm against his chest. Before she passed away, she had told him that he deserved every good thing in this world, that one day life would smile on him. Jamie looked at the bicycle and smiled. Maybe his mother had sent it down to him from the sky, where she had become a star watching over him each night. He pushed the bicycle out of the alley and began walking along the quiet Chicago streets at dawn. He liked this hour of the day, when no one shouted at him to get lost, when no one called the police to chase him away. He could move without hiding, almost as if he belonged there as much as anyone else, his mind filled with bright and tender images. He imagined riding his bicycle to Grant Park. Other children would see him and think he was just a normal boy with a normal bike. They wouldn't see a street child. They wouldn't see dirty clothes or tangled hair. They would only see a boy with a bicycle like theirs. Maybe they would invite him to play. Maybe they would say, "Hey, do you want to race with us?" And he would answer yes, and he would ride with them. And maybe he would have friends. For the first time in his life, he would have friends. But halfway there, Jamie suddenly stopped. He looked down at the bicycle, then at his short legs. A problem he hadn't considered rose clearly in his mind. He didn't know how to ride a bicycle. He had never been taught. He remembered the scenes he had watched in the park, other children pedaling with radiant smiles, and behind them, there was always a father or a mother running close, one hand holding firmly to the back of the seat, their voice full of encouragement, saying, "You're doing great. We're right here. Don't be afraid." Every child had someone to teach them. But Jamie had no one. His mother was gone. His father he had never known. He was alone. Who would teach him to ride? Jamie stood there for a long while, staring at the rusted bicycle with sad eyes. Then he took a deep breath and continued pushing it forward. Maybe someone would help him. Maybe in the park there would be a kind stranger who would see him and be willing to show him how to pedal. Maybe today would be his lucky day, just like the moment he found this bicycle. The hope was fragile, but it was still hope. The sun began to rise over the horizon, washing the tall buildings of Chicago in gold. Warm light spilled onto the street, driving away the cold of the night. Jamie kept pushing the bicycle, his small feet moving steadily along the sidewalk. And when the first rays of sunlight touched his face, the 6-year-old boy in the oversized coat, with the rusted bicycle at his side, finally reached Grant Park. The glossy black Mercedes S-Class pulled into the Grant Park parking lot just as the first rays of sunlight touched the surface of the lake. The car door opened, and Maxwell Thornton stepped out, alone, without a bodyguard at his side. At 37 years old, he was tall and commanding in a perfectly tailored 3-piece black suit, a Patek Philippe gleaming on his wrist, and eyes cold enough to make anyone lower their gaze. This was his secret habit, something very few people knew. Every early morning, before the city fully awakened, he drove to this park by himself. Conrad, his right hand who had stood beside him for 20 years, always objected. The boss shouldn't go alone. It's too dangerous. Too many men want him dead. But Maxwell needed this time. It was the only hour of the day when he could be himself. Not the most powerful mafia boss in Chicago. Not the wolf whom the entire underworld feared. Maxwell walked along the park path, his stride strong and decisive, the stride of a man accustomed to giving orders and being obeyed without hesitation. A few early morning walkers noticed him and instinctively stepped aside, yielding the path even though it was wide enough for both. They didn't know who he was, yet something in his presence made them feel they should keep their distance. Maxwell paid no attention. He was far too used to the fear of others, so used to it that it had become an ordinary part of daily life. He hadn't slept again the night before. He had lain on the king-size bed in his penthouse on the 50th floor, staring at the towering ceiling, feeling the vast room swallow him whole. He had everything people dreamed of. Money so abundant he couldn't spend it in 10 lifetimes. Power that made the entire city bow. The fear of others ensuring that no one dared touch him. But when he returned home, no one was waiting. No laughter greeted him when he opened the door. No one asked how his day had been. No one spoke his name without fear trembling beneath it. The Wolf, the nickname that made all of Chicago shudder. But a wolf is alone. A wolf may lead the pack, yet a wolf has no one with whom to share the long night. Maxwell passed a young father holding his little son's hand, the two of them laughing together about something only they understood. The boy looked up at his father with open admiration, and the father bent down to ruffle his son's hair with tenderness. A little farther on, a mother knelt to tie her young daughter's shoelaces, gently reminding her to be careful not to trip. Something twisted deep in Maxwell's chest at the sight. A strange sensation he couldn't name, as though an invisible hand were tightening around his heart. He didn't understand it. He didn't want to. He pushed it down as he always did when it surfaced, and kept walking. Maxwell headed toward the familiar bench beneath the large oak tree where he sat each morning to think, to momentarily forget the empire resting on his shoulders. But as he approached, he slowed. Someone was sitting in his place. A very small boy, perhaps about 6 years old, dressed in dirty, torn clothes, perched on the bench with a rusted bicycle propped beside him. The boy had messy brown hair that looked as though it hadn't been brushed in days, a smudged face with a strangely delicate beauty. Maxwell was about to turn away and find another bench. He didn't have the time or the inclination to deal with a street child, but just then the boy lifted his head and looked straight into his eyes. Large eyes, clear as polished glass, met his without blinking. And what made Maxwell stop wasn't the rare color of those eyes, but what he didn't find in them. There was no fear, not even the faintest trace of fear. The boy looked at him as if he were nothing more than an ordinary man taking a morning walk in the park, not the mafia boss the entire city feared. For the first time in many years, someone met Maxwell Thornton's gaze without trembling, without lowering their head, without stepping back. And he found he couldn't walk away. Jamie looked at the tall man standing in front of him and offered a friendly smile. He didn't understand why the man was staring at him like that, but he wasn't afraid. He had met all kinds of people on the streets, those who kindly gave him food, those who chased him away, those who ignored him as if he didn't exist. But this man seemed different. He didn't chase him away, and he didn't pretend not to see him. He simply stood there and looked. "Hello, sir." Jamie spoke first, his clear voice ringing softly through the quiet morning air. "Do you like sitting here too? It's the nicest spot in the park. I've been sitting here since the sun came up, and I can see the whole lake sparkle." Maxwell wasn't used to being approached, especially not by a child. In his world, no one spoke to him before he allowed it. No one dared look him straight in the eye the way this boy was doing. He didn't answer, yet strangely, he didn't walk away either. His feet felt rooted to the ground. Jamie wasn't discouraged by the silence. He was used to being ignored by adults, but he had learned that sometimes patience brought results. He glanced down at his rusted bicycle, then looked back up at Maxwell. "Do you know how to ride a bike?" Jamie asked, his eyes shining with hope. Maxwell remained silent for a long moment. The question was simple. Beneath him, the architect of Chicago's underworld, he didn't have time to talk to a street child about bicycles. Yet something in those clear eyes kept him from turning his back. "I do," he finally replied, his voice low and brief. Jamie's face lit up, as if he had discovered treasure. "Who taught you?" he asked, tilting his head with curiosity. Maxwell hesitated. The question touched a part of his memory he had buried deep for years. No one had taught him. He had learned on his own as an orphan in a children's home, falling again and again on an old bicycle he had found, until his knees were scarred and he finally managed to balance. No one had held the seat for him. No one had encouraged him when he fell. No one. "I don't have anyone to teach me," Jamie continued, when the man didn't answer. His voice remained clear, but there was a faint thread of sadness. "My mama lives in the stars now. I've never met my dad. It's just me. Alone." Those two words echoed in Maxwell's mind like a bell. He understood that feeling. He had lived with it his entire life. Jamie looked around the park where a few families were beginning to appear in the early sunlight. He pointed toward a father in the distance, teaching his daughter to ride, the two of them laughing together. Then he turned back and met Maxwell's eyes, his small voice steady and clear. "I see in the park that all the kids have their dads teaching them to ride. I want that too. Can you be my dad? Just for one day. Just today. Please, sir." Maxwell's heart seemed to miss a beat. In 37 years of life, he had heard countless proposals, business deals worth millions of dollars, enemies begging for mercy, flattery from men seeking his favor. But never, not once, had anyone asked him to be a father. It was the most absurd thing he had ever heard. He was Maxwell Thornton, the wolf, the man the Chicago underworld feared, the one people whispered about in the shadows with trembling voices. He wasn't someone meant to be a father. His reason shouted at him to walk away. This wasn't his concern. He had an empire to run. He didn't have time for nonsense like this. But those eyes held his gaze without blinking, looking at him as if he were only an ordinary man strolling through a park, not the monster people called him. And in that moment, Maxwell remembered himself at 6 years old, orphaned, alone, longing for someone, anyone, to call family even for a single day. He remembered standing by the fence of the orphanage, watching other children being picked up by their parents, wondering why no one ever came for him. Surprising even himself, Maxwell sat down on the bench beside Jamie. "Just one day," he said, his voice still low but no longer cold. Jamie beamed, a radiant smile spreading across his smudged face. It was the purest smile Maxwell had ever seen, without hidden motive, without fear, without calculation, only the simple joy of a child. "Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dad." Jamie jumped off the bench and ran to his rusted bicycle. "Dad, teach me how to ride. I've wanted to learn for so long." Maxwell stood and walked over to the bike. He examined it for a moment, the peeling red paint, the spreading rust, the torn seat. To him it was nothing but scrap. But the way Jamie looked at it as if it were priceless kept him silent. He gripped the back of the seat firmly while Jamie climbed on. The boy's legs were short, stretching to reach the pedals. "Start pedaling," Maxwell said. "I've got you." Jamie began to pedal. The bike wobbled and he fell to the ground. Maxwell expected tears, but Jamie simply got up, brushed off the dust, and smiled. "I'll try again, Dad." The boy fell again and again, too many times to count. His knees scraped, his hands covered in dirt, yet he didn't cry once. Every time he fell, he stood back up, smiled, and said, "I'll try again." Maxwell guided him patiently, adjusting his posture, reminding him to keep his balance. He didn't know he possessed this kind of patience. He didn't know he could speak so gently to anyone. By mid-morning, when the sun was high and the park grew more crowded, Maxwell realized something strange. He was smiling. Not the cold smile of closing a deal, not the triumphant smile when an enemy fell, but a real smile, born of simple joy, for the first time in years. From a distance, inside the Mercedes parked in the lot, Conrad held binoculars trained on the bench beneath the oak tree. He had followed Maxwell there as he did every morning, worried about his boss's safety. But what he saw through the lenses made him question his own eyes. Maxwell Thornton, the wolf, the coldest mafia boss in Chicago, was holding the seat of a rusted bicycle, while a dirty little boy learned to ride, and he was smiling. Conrad lowered the binoculars, rubbed his eyes, then looked again. The scene was still there, clear as daylight. In 20 years beside Maxwell, he had never seen his boss like this. The morning passed more quickly than Maxwell had expected. While Jamie was struggling to keep his balance on the bicycle, a loud, unmistakable sound broke through the air. The boy's stomach growled sharply, shattering both their concentration. Jamie stopped, his face flushing with embarrassment, his hands still gripping the handlebars. "I'm okay," he said quickly, trying to pedal again as if nothing had happened. But his stomach growled once more, louder than before, as if protesting his attempt to hide it. Maxwell steadied the bike and looked at him. "What did you eat this morning?" he asked, his voice no longer as cold as it had been. Jamie fell silent. He lowered his head, staring at the handlebars, unable to meet Maxwell's eyes. The silence answered more clearly than words ever could. He hadn't eaten anything. "What about yesterday?" Maxwell pressed, something in his tone shifting into a concern he didn't even recognize in himself. Jamie kept his head down, his voice barely above a whisper. "I found half a loaf of bread behind a bakery. It was a little hard, but I could still eat it. Before that, I had an apple, but one side was bruised, so I only ate the good part." Something inside Maxwell cracked. It wasn't pity. He had seen too much in his life to feel simple pity. This was something deeper, something he couldn't name. He had witnessed violence, seen death, faced the cruelest corners of the underworld. But this was different. A 6-year-old child digging through trash for food, eating what others had thrown away, surviving on half a hardened loaf of bread and a bruised apple. "Come on," Maxwell said firmly. He leaned the bicycle against the bench and took Jamie's hand. "I'm taking you to eat." Jamie's eyes lit up, though hesitation still flickered across his face. "But what about my bike? What if someone takes it?" Maxwell looked at the rusted bicycle that anyone else would have called garbage. But to Jamie, it was treasure. He understood that. "Bring it with us," he said. The two of them, a man in an expensive suit and a dirty little boy pushing a rusted bicycle, walked along the park path. People stared curiously, but Maxwell didn't care. He led Jamie to a small diner near the park, not one of the elegant restaurants he usually frequented, just a modest place with simple wooden tables and the rich, comforting smell of food in the air. Jamie parked his bicycle outside by the window where he could see it, then timidly stepped inside behind Maxwell. He sat down, eyes wide, looking around as if he had entered another world. When the server brought a menu, Jamie held it like a priceless treasure. He studied the pictures of the food and swallowed, but didn't dare speak. "There's so much," he whispered. "I don't know what to choose." He didn't say that he had never sat in a place like this, never ordered from a menu, never been asked what he wanted to eat. Maxwell ordered without glancing at the menu: a hamburger, fries, and a chocolate milkshake for the boy. Black coffee for me. When the food arrived, Jamie's eyes widened like marbles. The hamburger was bigger than anything he had ever seen, the fries golden and steaming, the milkshake tall with a cloud of whipped cream on top. He swallowed and looked at the plate, then at Maxwell, as if asking permission. "Go ahead," Maxwell said. Jamie began to eat, quickly and hungrily, as though afraid someone might take the food away. Halfway through, he paused, glanced at Maxwell with worry, then slowed down, trying to eat more politely. Every so often he looked up, checking whether Maxwell was annoyed, whether he thought him greedy. Maxwell simply watched the boy eat, his coffee growing cold in his hand untouched. When the plate was nearly empty, Jamie slowed again. He looked at the remaining fries, then at Maxwell, hesitation clear on his smudged face. "Can I take the rest with me?" he asked softly. "For tonight. Maybe tomorrow I won't find anything to eat." Those words struck Maxwell harder than any blow he had ever taken. This child was used to not knowing where his next meal would come from, used to saving food like a squirrel preparing for winter. 6 years old, and already thinking about survival. Maxwell said nothing. He called the server and ordered 2 more hamburgers to go. When the boxed meals were placed in front of Jamie, the boy stared at them with tear-filled eyes. "It's so much," he whispered. "I could eat for a whole week." At dusk, Maxwell walked Jamie back to where he lived. The boy led him through familiar streets into Little Italy, then into the dark alley behind the restaurant, and Maxwell saw Jamie's home, a folded piece of cardboard placed neatly behind a dumpster, an old coat torn in places used as a blanket, a plastic bag with a few small belongings hanging from the brick wall. That was all. That was what a 6-year-old called home. Jamie carefully set the food boxes down as if they were gold, then turned to Maxwell with the brightest smile. "Thank you for today," he said, his voice clear and sincere. "This was the happiest day of my life. I got to eat good food. I learned how to ride a bike. I got to have a dad. I'll never forget it." Maxwell nodded, unable to speak. He turned and walked away. Yet every few steps he looked back. Jamie stood there waving, his smile still shining in the dark alley beside the rusted bicycle. The image haunted Maxwell all the way home. That night, in the vast penthouse on the 50th floor, Maxwell lay in bed staring at the ceiling. He couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those clear eyes, that radiant smile, and the piece of cardboard in the dark alley. He was a man who had everything, yet he couldn't give a child a home. Maxwell woke when the first light of a new day slipped through the heavy curtains of the penthouse. He hadn't slept much, tossing and turning all night with the image of the boy in the dark alley etched into his mind. He glanced at the clock. It was still early, but he knew he couldn't remain in bed any longer. He rose, dressed, and stepped into the living room where Conrad was already waiting with the schedule for the day. "Sir," Conrad said in his usual professional tone, "the meeting with the Eastern partners is at 9 o'clock. They've been waiting for this for 2 weeks. It's very important." Maxwell looked out the window where Chicago was slowly waking beneath the pale glow of dawn. He stood in silence for a moment, then said quietly, "Take me to the park." Conrad thought he had misheard. "Sir?" Maxwell turned, his gray eyes still cold yet holding something different. "Take me to Grant Park." "But the meeting," Conrad replied, unable to hide his surprise. "The Eastern partners won't be pleased if we reschedule. You know what they're like." "Reschedule it," Maxwell said firmly. "Tell them something urgent came up." Conrad stood speechless. In 20 years, beside Maxwell Thornton, he had never seen his boss postpone an important meeting for any reason. Maxwell was a man who placed business above everything, a man no one and nothing could sway. And yet today he was canceling a $1 million meeting to go to a park. Conrad didn't understand what was happening, but he knew better than to question it. "Yes, sir," he said, and left to prepare the car. Half an hour later, the black Mercedes S-Class pulled into the Grant Park parking lot. Maxwell stepped out and walked straight toward the bench beneath the oak tree. From a distance, he could already see a small figure sitting there, head turned toward the parking lot as if waiting for someone. When Maxwell approached, Jamie sprang to his feet, eyes shining, a radiant smile spreading across his face. "You came back, Dad?" the boy exclaimed, his voice filled with surprise and joy. "I thought it was only for 1 day. I thought I wouldn't see you again." Maxwell looked at him, saw the oversized coat still stained from yesterday, the unbrushed hair, the clear eyes gazing at him as if he were the entire world. "You weren't riding very well yesterday," he said, his voice low but no longer cold. "You need more practice." Jamie grinned widely. He knew it was an excuse, and Maxwell knew that Jamie knew, but neither of them said it aloud. Some things didn't need words. The bicycle lessons continued. Jamie improved faster than Maxwell had expected. He rode longer distances, balanced better, and fell less than the day before. Each time he managed to ride farther without falling, he would glance back, searching for Maxwell, and beam when he saw him watching. Maxwell realized he was waiting for those moments. He was waiting for the boy's smile. Mid-morning, they rested on the bench. Jamie sat beside him, legs swinging because they didn't reach the ground. He was quiet for a while, gazing at the lake shimmering in the sunlight. Then he spoke softly. "My mom worked in a factory," he said, his tone gentle as if telling a fairy tale. "She left early and came home very late, but every night, no matter how tired she was, she sang to me before I went to sleep. She sang beautifully." Maxwell said nothing, only listened. It was the first time in his life he had truly listened to someone instead of issuing orders, instead of waiting to respond, instead of calculating what the other person wanted from him. "Then she got sick," Jamie continued, his voice lowering. "She stayed in bed more. She sang less. I had to take care of more things. I learned to cook rice, though I burned it a lot. She would laugh and say it was okay. A little burnt was still good enough to eat." The boy paused, eyes distant. Before she left, she held my hand and told me she would become a star in the sky. She said every night I should look up and find the brightest star. That would be her, watching over me and protecting me. Jamie turned to Maxwell, his eyes shimmering. Every night I look for her star. Last night I did too, and I told her about you. I told her I have a dad now, even if it's only for one day. She must be happy. Maxwell didn't know what to say. His throat tightened. He was a man who could command an entire city to tremble, yet he couldn't find words for a 6-year-old boy speaking of his lost mother. He simply reached out and placed his hand on Jamie's small shoulder, squeezing gently, a silent promise. Jamie leaned against him and smiled. At noon, Maxwell opened the bag he had brought. Maggie, his housekeeper, had prepared it when he told her he needed food to take away. She hadn't asked why, though he had noticed the curiosity in her eyes. Inside were sandwiches, fruit, juice, and pastries. Jamie ate happily, talking between bites about everything that came to mind. He spoke of a stray cat that visited his alley, of the restaurant owner who sometimes gave him leftovers, of clouds shaped like strange creatures in the morning sky. Maxwell listened, occasionally nodding or asking a brief question. He realized this was the most meaningful lunch he had shared in years. There were no calculations, no schemes, no one trying to gain something from him, just a child telling stories and a man listening. At dusk, Maxwell walked Jamie back to the familiar alley. The boy carefully placed his bicycle in its corner, checked the remaining food boxes from the day before, then turned to Maxwell. "Dad," he said softly, hope filling his voice, "will you come tomorrow?" Maxwell hesitated. He didn't know how to answer. The man whose name was whispered in fear. He had an empire to run. He couldn't simply come to the park every day to teach a child to ride a bicycle. "Maybe," he finally said. Jamie smiled, bright as sunlight. "I know you'll come," he said with complete trust. "I'll wait for you at the bench." Maxwell didn't deny it. He turned and walked away, and this time he didn't look back. He didn't need to. He already knew he would return tomorrow. On the third day, Jamie did something neither of them had expected. He rode a full circle around the bench area, without Maxwell holding the seat. The rusted bicycle rolled steadily forward, Jamie leaning slightly to keep his balance, his small legs pumping the worn pedals with determination. When he completed the circle and stopped in front of Maxwell, his eyes shone like twin stars. "I did it, Dad," he shouted, his voice bursting with excitement. "Did you see? I rode all the way around without falling." Maxwell stood there and did something he couldn't remember the last time he had done. He clapped. The sound echoed in the morning air. Not polite applause at a high society gala, not calculated applause to please someone, but real applause rising straight from the heart for pure joy. After practice, they bought ice cream from a cart in the park. Jamie chose chocolate. Maxwell chose vanilla because he didn't know what else to choose. They sat on the bench beneath the warm sunlight, eating quietly while Jamie talked and Maxwell listened. He didn't notice the ice cream melting until Jamie suddenly burst into laughter. "Dad, you've got ice cream on your nose." The boy laughed uncontrollably, pointing at him. The clear, bright laughter rang across the park, making passers-by turn their heads. Maxwell touched his nose and found a white smudge there. He looked at Jamie laughing so hard he could barely breathe, and without meaning to, he laughed too. Not a cold smile, not a social performance, but real laughter, breaking free from a place deep inside that he had thought long dead. On the fourth day it rained. Heavy drops fell from a gray sky, turning the park into a blur of water and mud. Maxwell still came. He found Jamie sheltering beneath the awning of a small cafe near the park, the rusted bicycle propped beside him. The boy's eyes lit up when he saw Maxwell running toward him, his suit damp with rain. "You still came even though it's raining," Jamie exclaimed, joy and disbelief in his voice. "I said I would," Maxwell replied, brushing water from his shoulder. They sat inside the cafe watching the rain streak down the windows. Maxwell ordered coffee for himself and hot chocolate for Jamie. When thunder cracked loudly, Jamie flinched, fear flashing across his face. Maxwell looked at him and said, "Do you know how to tell how far away thunder is?" Jamie shook his head, eyes wide with curiosity. "When you see lightning, count the seconds until you hear the thunder," Maxwell explained. "Every 5 seconds is about a mile. If you count 10 seconds, it means the storm is 2 miles away. Far enough. Nothing to be afraid of." Jamie tried immediately. When the next flash lit the sky, he began counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The thunder rolled. 6 seconds, he cheered. That means it's more than a mile away. Far, right, Dad? Maxwell nodded, and Jamie smiled brightly, no longer afraid. You know so much, the boy said, admiration shining in his eyes. Maxwell looked out at the falling rain. There are things I don't know, he said quietly, almost to himself, like how to be a father. On the 5th day, Maxwell arrived carrying a large bag. Inside were new clothes he had asked Maggie to buy. Shirts, jeans, a warm jacket, sneakers, all perfectly sized for a 6-year-old boy. Jamie stared at the clothes in disbelief. All of this is for me, he asked, his voice trembling. Maxwell nodded. Try them on. Jamie ran to the public restroom to change. When he stepped out, Maxwell barely recognized him. The boy looked completely different. Clean, fresh, brown hair neatly combed, eyes bright against a face no longer smudged with dirt. Jamie spun around, admiring himself. Do I look like a normal kid now, Dad? He asked hopefully. I want to be like the other kids in the park. Maxwell looked at him and something tightened painfully in his chest. You don't look normal, he said. Jamie's face fell for a moment, disappointment flickering across it. But Maxwell continued. You look special. Much more than normal. Jamie's eyes lit up again, and before Maxwell could react, the boy rushed forward and wrapped his arms around him. Small arms tightened around Maxwell's waist. Maxwell froze. He couldn't remember the last time anyone had hugged him. In his world, no one touched him without permission, and the embraces he had received, if any, were always shadowed by fear or motive. But this was different. A child's embrace, pure and without agenda. The first time someone held him without being afraid of him. On the 6th day, the park was more crowded than usual. Families filled the paths, and Jamie watched the other children with longing. A boy about 7 ran over curiously. He was Tommy Zhang, the son of a business associate Maxwell knew. Hey, do you want to play tag? Tommy asked brightly. My name's Tommy. What's yours? Jamie glanced at Maxwell as if asking permission. Maxwell nodded, and Jamie's smile widened. I'm Jamie, he replied, and ran off with Tommy. Maxwell stood at a distance watching the two boys chase each other, their laughter ringing through the park. It was the first time Jamie had a friend. A strange warmth rose in Maxwell's chest. Pride, perhaps. He wasn't sure. He only knew that seeing Jamie laugh with another child made him happy. On the 7th day, everything shifted. That afternoon, Jamie rode toward Maxwell faster than usual, eager to show off his new skill. He braked sharply in front of him, the bicycle wobbling as he nearly fell. Maxwell moved on instinct, catching him just in time. Jamie beamed, eyes shining. Did you see how fast I was going, Dad? They both froze. Jamie's eyes widened in sudden fear. I'm sorry, he stammered. I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to call you that. It just slipped out. Maxwell stood there, his heart pounding harder than during any tense negotiation, harder than in the face of danger. The word Dad echoed in his mind like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. He didn't correct the boy. He didn't say, don't call me that. He simply stood there, looking into those eyes now filled with anxious anticipation, and he said nothing. That night, Maxwell returned to his penthouse and sat alone by the window, gazing at the glittering lights of Chicago below. The word Dad echoed again and again in his thoughts. He faced a truth he couldn't deny. He didn't want this to end. One day had become a week, and a week had become something far greater, something he had never imagined he would ever have. That night, Maxwell couldn't sleep. He stood by the penthouse window, looking down at the glittering lights of Chicago below, but his mind was somewhere else. The word Dad echoed over and over in his head, spoken in that clear, natural voice, as if it had always belonged there. He picked up his phone and made 2 calls, one to Conrad, one to Harrison Price, his personal attorney. Come to my penthouse immediately, he told both of them. It's important. Half an hour later, Conrad and Harrison arrived. They stood in the vast living room, worry written plainly on their faces. When Maxwell summoned them urgently in the middle of the night, it was rarely good news. Usually it meant betrayal, a failed deal, or an enemy who needed to be handled. Maxwell stood with his back to them, gazing out at the city stretched beneath the glass walls. He remained silent long enough for Conrad and Harrison to exchange uneasy glances. Then he spoke. I want to adopt the boy. Silence fell. The stillness stretched so long it became suffocating. Conrad and Harrison stood frozen, unsure whether they had heard correctly. Conrad found his voice first. "Sir, are you serious?" Harrison followed, his tone careful, as if stepping onto thin ice. "This is an extremely complicated matter. You are, well, you know who you are. We're talking about a legal adoption, with everything that requires under the law." Maxwell turned around, his eyes still cold but carrying a new resolve both men immediately recognized. "I know exactly who I am," he said, his voice low and firm. "That's precisely why I need you." Harrison inhaled slowly and began outlining the facts. Illinois adoption law requires a full background investigation, proof of legitimate income, and a comprehensive evaluation of the home environment. You have two identities. On paper, you're a respectable real estate businessman. Off paper, there's another record no one dares mention. If the authorities dig deeply, if they uncover anything suspicious, you won't just lose custody. You could face serious legal consequences. Conrad nodded and added quietly, "There's another issue, sir. You have many enemies. If they learn you have a child who matters to you, they'll see him as a weakness. The boy will become a target. Our world isn't meant for children." Maxwell listened without interrupting. He knew all of it. He had thought about every risk throughout the night, but he had also thought about those clear eyes that looked at him without fear, about the laughter ringing through the park, about the small arms that had wrapped around him without hesitation. "Sir," Conrad said more gently, "I've followed you for 20 years. I've never seen you the way you were this past week." You laughed. You truly laughed. "I don't know what that boy has, but he's done something no one has managed in 2 decades. Still, I have to be honest. Our world is dangerous. A child shouldn't grow up inside it." Maxwell turned back toward the window. He looked down at the city, at the empire he had built with blood and iron will, with ruthlessness and control. "My entire life," he began slowly, "I built this empire. Money, power, territory. I have everything people dream about. But when I go home at night, no one waits for me. When I die, there's no one to leave it to. No one to carry on what I've built. No one who will remember me as a man, only as a name people feared in the history of the underworld." He turned to face them again. "That boy looks at me like I'm a good man. Not a mafia boss, not the wolf, just a man who can teach him to ride a bike. No one has ever looked at me that way. Not once." He paused, drawing in a steady breath. "I want to deserve the way he looks at me. I want to become the man he thinks I am." Harrison studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "We'll need to construct a completely clean record," he said. "Verified legitimate income, a child-appropriate living environment, full compliance with every inspection from Child Protective Services. The process could take months, possibly even a year. It's not impossible. It's just extremely difficult." Maxwell's gaze didn't waver. "Difficult has never stopped me from doing anything. Start the process." The next morning, Maxwell arrived at the park earlier than usual. He sat on the bench beneath the oak tree and waited. When Jamie appeared, pushing the rusted bicycle and smiling the moment he saw him, Maxwell felt his heart beat faster. "You're early, Dad," Jamie called, his green eyes bright. "I woke up early too because I wanted to see you." Maxwell stood and knelt down so they were eye level. He looked into those clear eyes without fear or calculation, filled only with joy at seeing him. "Jamie," he said gently, softer than he had ever spoken before, "do you want to come home with me? Not for one day, but forever. I want to be your real dad, and I want you to be my real son. Forever." Jamie sat inside the Mercedes S-Class, his eyes pressed to the window as the car glided through the streets of Chicago. He had never ridden in a car before, never traveled along smooth roads in a seat of soft leather with a clean, gentle scent in the air. He held tightly to Maxwell's hand, unwilling to let go, as if afraid that if he loosened his grip, everything would vanish like a dream. When the car stopped in front of a towering skyscraper, Jamie's eyes widened so much they nearly took over his small face. He tilted his head back, trying to see the top, but the building rose so high he had to lean farther and still couldn't find its end. "Do you live here, Dad?" he whispered, as if speaking too loudly might break the spell. Maxwell nodded and led him inside. They stepped into the elevator, and Jamie pressed close to Maxwell as the numbers climbed. 20, 30, 40. The boy's fingers tightened, his body trembling slightly. He had never gone this high, never stood inside a metal box flying toward the sky. 50. The doors opened, and Jamie stepped into another world. The penthouse stretched wide before him, polished wooden floors gleaming beneath warm afternoon light, elegant furniture arranged with quiet perfection, and a vast wall of glass revealing the entire city of Chicago below. Sunlight poured in, bathing the room in a golden glow like something from a fairy tale. But Jamie didn't run forward the way most children would. He stood frozen near the elevator, shoulders drawn inward, trying to make himself small. "Do you live here alone, Dad?" he asked softly, so quietly Maxwell had to kneel to hear him. "It's so big." Maxwell lowered himself to the boy's level. "Not alone anymore," he said gently. "Now I have you." Jamie glanced down at his worn shoes, then at the shining floor. "Am I allowed to walk on it, Dad? My shoes are dirty. I don't want to make your house messy." Something tightened painfully in Maxwell's throat. This child who had slept on cardboard and eaten scraps worried about dirtying a floor. "You can walk anywhere you want," Maxwell said softly but firmly. "This is your home now." A warm voice spoke behind them. "Hello, Jamie. I've heard so much about you. You're even more handsome than I imagined." Jamie turned to see a middle-aged woman with auburn hair and a kind smile. "This is Maggie," Maxwell explained. "She takes care of the house. She'll help take care of you, too." Maggie knelt and extended her hand. "Come on, sweetheart. Let me show you your room." Jamie looked to Maxwell for permission, and when he saw the nod, he followed Maggie shyly down a long hallway. She opened a door, and Jamie stood speechless. The room was larger than the alley where he had once lived. A big bed with crisp white sheets stood in the center. Shelves lined with colorful books filled one wall. A wardrobe waited neatly arranged. Toys sat organized on low shelves. Sunlight streamed through wide windows, making the entire room glow. Jamie stepped toward the bed and touched the blanket carefully, reverently, as though it were something sacred. "Is this mine?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "All of this is mine." Maxwell stood in the doorway watching him. "It's yours," he said. "All of it." That first night Maxwell couldn't sleep. He lay in his own room listening to every sound in the penthouse. Around midnight he heard a soft noise from Jamie's room. He rose and opened the door quietly. The bed was empty. His heart clenched for a split second before he saw Jamie curled up on the floor beside the bed, clutching the blanket. The boy looked up, eyes wide in the dim light. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said quickly. "The bed is too soft. I'm not used to it. I didn't want to make the sheets dirty, so I came down here. I'm used to sleeping on the floor." Maxwell didn't answer. He stepped inside and sat down on the floor beside him. Jamie blinked in surprise. "What are you doing, Dad?" "Sitting with you," Maxwell replied simply. They remained there in silence, two figures in silver moonlight. Gradually, Jamie leaned against him, his eyes growing heavy. His small hand searched for Maxwell's and held on tightly, as if sleep could only come when he felt that steady presence beside him. Maxwell stayed until Jamie's breathing became slow and deep. The first week brought small challenges Maxwell had never imagined. Jamie still woke before dawn, a habit from his days on the street. Maggie noticed bread tucked into his coat pocket, saved for later. She said nothing, only made sure the refrigerator was always full, and gently reminded him that he could eat whenever he wanted, as much as he wanted. Maxwell learned fatherhood in the most awkward way. He read bedtime stories but gave the characters the wrong voices. He tried cooking eggs for breakfast and burned them black. Jamie looked at the charred eggs, then at Maxwell, and grinned before eating every bite. "They're good, Dad," he said brightly. "I like the way you cook." One afternoon, Maxwell noticed the rusted bicycle standing in the corner of Jamie's room beside brand new toys. "I'll buy you a new bike," he said. "This one's too old." Jamie shook his head, gazing at it tenderly. "I want to keep this one. This is the bike that helped me find you. If I didn't have it, I wouldn't have gone to the park that day. I wouldn't have met you." Maxwell studied the peeling paint and rusted wheels, trash in anyone else's eyes, treasure in Jamie's. He nodded and said nothing more. That night, Maxwell stood at Jamie's doorway watching him sleep. The boy slept on the bed now, slowly growing used to its softness, but his hand still clutched a small scrap of fabric, a torn piece from his mother's old coat, the only thing he had left of her. Maxwell stood there a long time, watching the peaceful face resting in the dark. For the first time in his life, he felt he had a reason to come home each night. For the first time, the vast penthouse no longer felt cold or empty. Everything seemed perfect, perhaps too perfect. 2 weeks passed like a beautiful dream. Jamie slowly grew used to his new life, to the soft bed, to full meals. to calling someone dad, and knowing that voice would answer. One weekend afternoon, Maxwell decided to take Jamie back to Grant Park, where everything had begun, but this time with a different purpose. He had arranged for Tommy Jung, the boy Jamie had met the week before, to come and play. The two children spotted each other and instantly ran off in a game of tag as if they had been friends for years. Their laughter rang across the park, bright and carefree. Jamie ran faster than anyone would have expected, his small legs flying over the green grass, brown hair lifting in the wind. He looked stronger now than the day Maxwell first saw him, cheeks flushed with health, green eyes shining. Maxwell stood at a distance watching, Conrad beside him like a loyal shadow. They remained silent until Conrad finally spoke. "I haven't seen you smile like this in a long time, sir." Maxwell turned slightly, only then realizing that he was smiling. He didn't know when it had appeared, natural and unguarded. He had smiled more in these 2 weeks than in the previous 20 years combined. Tommy and Jamie kicked a soccer ball, then played hide-and-seek, then chased each other again. They laughed without pause, and Maxwell saw how easily Jamie blended in. The boy had been alone for too long, but his hunger for friendship had never disappeared. Tommy ran over to Jamie, both of them out of breath. "Hey Jamie, want to come over to my house sometime? I've got tons of toys. I even have a game console. And my mom makes amazing cookies." Jamie turned toward Maxwell, eyes shimmering with hope, silently asking permission. Maxwell nodded, and Jamie's smile widened. Warmth rose in Maxwell's chest, something he now recognized as pride. He was proud of his son. Then, another child approached, a boy about 8, likely a friend of Tommy's. He looked Jamie up and down curiously. "So you're Tommy's new friend?" he asked. "What does your dad do?" Jamie froze. His mouth opened, then closed. He glanced toward Maxwell, the tall man in a black suit standing at a distance with Conrad beside him like a guard. "My dad is in business," Jamie finally answered, his voice small and uncertain. The boy studied Maxwell for a moment. "Your dad looks scary," he said bluntly. "Like the bad guys in movies. Why doesn't he smile?" Jamie lowered his head without answering. Maxwell stood close enough to hear every word. The child's comment pierced his chest, not because it insulted him, but because it was true. He did look frightening. He was frightening. And his son would grow up beneath the shadow of the wolf, beneath the shadow of the most feared mafia boss in Chicago. What would people see when they looked at Jamie? The son of a criminal, the son of a killer, the son of a monster whispered about in fear. On the drive home, Maxwell was silent. He kept his eyes on the road, but his thoughts were far away. Jamie sat in the back seat watching him through the rearview mirror, worry written across his small face. "Dad," he said softly, "are you mad at me?" Maxwell met those eyes in the mirror. "No," he replied. "I'm not mad. I'm thinking." "About what?" Maxwell didn't answer. He was thinking about the future. About Jamie starting school and being judged because of his father's reputation. About Jamie being pulled toward the underworld whether he wanted it or not. About enemies who wouldn't hesitate to use the boy to hurt him. He wanted to give Jamie a better life. But what did better mean when your father was Maxwell Thornton, the wolf? That night, after Jamie had fallen asleep, Maxwell picked up his phone and called Harrison. "This is Harrison," the lawyer answered after a few rings. "Is something wrong, sir?" "I want to review the business structure," Maxwell said, his voice steady and serious. "Which parts can be fully converted into legitimate operations? Which parts can be transferred to someone else?" Silence lingered on the other end of the line. "You want to step back?" Harrison finally asked, disbelief in his tone. Maxwell looked out at the glittering Chicago skyline. "I want options," he said quietly. For the future, it was the first time Maxwell had truly considered change, the first time he imagined there might be a life beyond the empire he had built. The seed had been planted. After ending the call, he walked to Jamie's room. The boy slept peacefully, arms wrapped around a new teddy bear Maggie had bought him, his face calm and untroubled. Maxwell stood in the doorway watching his son breathe. "I'll give you the life you deserve," he whispered. "I promise." But beyond the penthouse walls, somewhere in the city, unseen eyes were watching. Rumors about the wolf's son had begun to spread through the underworld, and in the darkness, enemies were listening. Rumors spread through the Chicago underworld like wildfire. Maxwell Thornton has a son? The wolf, the man with no weaknesses, the one no one could touch, now has something to lose? In dark rooms, behind closed doors, in hushed phone calls, people began to speak of the boy. A street kid, they said. Thornton picked him up from somewhere, heard he dotes on him. No one dared act directly. Maxwell was still Maxwell. His power remained untouchable, and anyone foolish enough to strike at him knew the price. But there are other ways to wound a powerful enemy. No guns, no blood. Just a phone call to the right place. A letter sent to the right desk. That morning, Josephine Hartwell sat in her office at the Illinois Department of Child Protection, reading a file that had just been placed before her. She was 55 years old. Her salt and pepper hair pulled into a neat bun, sharp eyes that had seen far too much over 30 years of service. She was principled, unyielding, and never allowed wealth or influence to sway her decisions. She didn't care who someone was, rich or poor, powerful or ordinary. She cared about one thing only. Were children safe? The file on her desk was an anonymous report. No sender, no contact information, just neatly typed lines. A street child approximately 6 years old, currently living with a notorious criminal, Maxwell Thornton, known as the Wolf, the most powerful mafia boss in Chicago. The child may be in danger. Josephine read the report twice, eyes narrowing slightly. She had received countless anonymous tips over her career. Some were true, many were false. Some were nothing more than personal vendettas disguised as concern. But she never ignored a report without investigating. She opened her computer and began searching. Maxwell Thornton. On paper, he was a successful real estate developer, owner of multiple properties and large-scale projects across Chicago. Clean tax records. No criminal history. A model citizen. But Josephine had done this work long enough to know that some things never appear on paper. She had heard the name the Wolf before, in whispers, on the edges of cases she had brushed against. She knew there were men the law could not easily reach, men who stood in the light yet lived in shadow. She decided she would look into this personally. At the same time, Maxwell's phone rang. Harrison Price, his attorney, spoke with unusual tension. "We have a problem, sir. Child Protective Services wants to conduct a review. They received a report about Jamie." Maxwell rose slowly from his chair, every muscle tightening. "Who filed it?" "Anonymous," Harrison replied. "But someone knows about Jamie. Someone knows you're raising a child. And they contacted the department." Silence filled the space between them. Maxwell's grip tightened around the phone until his knuckles turned pale. 1,000 thoughts raced through his mind at once. Who? Who would dare? And more importantly, what did they want? "They're not taking him," he said at last, his voice low and dangerous. "Sir," Harrison answered carefully, "we have to follow the law. All eyes are watching. If you make one wrong move, they'll have grounds to remove Jamie permanently." Maxwell ended the call and stood staring out the window. His first instinct was to find whoever made that report and deal with it the way he always did. He had the men, the reach, the ability to make someone disappear without a trace. That was how the Wolf solved problems. Then he heard laughter drifting from Jamie's room. Bright, innocent laughter as the boy chatted with Maggie about something trivial and joyful. And Maxwell realized that if he acted like the Wolf now, he would prove them right. He would prove he was exactly the danger they claimed, that Jamie was unsafe with him. He would have to fight this differently. Maxwell stepped out of his office and found Maggie. "Prepare the house," he told her. "We're expecting visitors. Make sure everything is in order." "Perfect." Maggie looked at him, didn't question, only nodded. She had served him long enough to know when silence was wiser than curiosity. Jamie ran out from his room, eyes bright. "Dad, what's going on?" he asked, tilting his head. "Why do you look so serious?" Maxwell looked down into those eyes filled with trust. He forced a smile, though it lacked the easy warmth he had found in recent weeks. "Nothing's wrong," he said. "I just have something to take care of. Go play. Don't worry." But Jamie didn't smile. He watched Maxwell closely, his eyes clear but not naive. He had lived on the streets long enough to read fear in adults, long enough to sense when something was being hidden, and he knew something most ordinary children never learned so early. Happiness doesn't last forever. The penthouse doorbell rang exactly at 10 in the morning. Maxwell was ready. He wore a light gray suit instead of his usual black, trying to appear less intimidating. Harrison had arrived early to assist, and Conrad stood at a distant corner, watching everything with an unreadable expression. Maggie opened the door, and 3 people stepped inside. At the front was Josephine Hartwell, small in stature yet carrying undeniable authority. Her salt and pepper hair was neatly pinned back. her sharp eyes scanning the penthouse without the slightest sign of being impressed by its luxury. Behind her were two younger staff members, a man and a woman, holding clipboards and files, their expressions professionally serious. "Mr. Thornton," Josephine said. Her voice wasn't cold, but it wasn't warm either. It was neutral, professional. "I am Josephine Hartwell, Director of the Illinois Department of Child Protection. We received a report regarding a child residing at this address. I need to conduct an inspection and interviews." Maxwell nodded, keeping his tone calm and cooperative. "Of course, Ms. Hartwell. Please come in. We're prepared to cooperate fully." Josephine stepped inside, her eyes absorbing everything. She missed nothing. Not the artwork on the walls, not the arrangement of furniture, not the light in the room, not the atmosphere itself. She had done this work for 30 years, and she knew the most beautiful homes sometimes hid the ugliest truths. "I need to see the child's room," she said. It wasn't a request. It was a statement. Maxwell led them down the hallway to Jamie's room. The space was clean and orderly, the bed neatly made, toys arranged on shelves, books lined up by height, clothes hung properly in the closet. Josephine walked slowly around the room, her gaze recording every detail. She paused when she noticed the rusted bicycle in the corner, oddly out of place among the new and polished things surrounding it. "Why is this here?" she asked, her tone neutral though her eyes were curious. Maxwell looked at the bicycle, and for a brief second his expression softened. "It's Jamie's," he said. "He found it before he met me. He doesn't want to let it go. He says it's the bike that helped him find me." Josephine wrote something down without comment. She continued her inspection through the bathroom, the kitchen, the living area, every corner of the penthouse. She asked about Jamie's diet, his routine, his education. Maxwell and Maggie answered carefully, demonstrating that the boy was cared for in every possible way. Finally, Josephine turned to Maxwell. "I need to speak with the child alone," she said. "Without you present." Maxwell stiffened. Every instinct in him resisted. He didn't want Jamie alone with this woman, didn't want the boy facing questions he couldn't control. But Harrison caught his eye and gave a subtle signal. "Cooperate. Don't give them a reason." Maxwell nodded reluctantly. "Of course," he said, his voice steady though his hands tightened slightly. "I'll be in the next room if needed." Jamie was brought into the living room where Josephine sat on the sofa. He stepped in, eyes studying the unfamiliar woman with caution but not fear. Josephine smiled for the first time since arriving and motioned for him to sit beside her. "Hello, Jamie," she said, her voice far gentler than it had been with Maxwell. "I'm Josephine. I just want to talk with you for a little while. Can you tell me about your life here?" Jamie sat down, his feet swinging because they didn't reach the floor. "Yes, ma'am. I live here with Dad Maxwell," he began in his clear voice. "I have my own room. My bed is really big and soft. I have toys and books. Maggie cooks really good food. I get to eat until I'm full every day." Josephine nodded and wrote notes. "Does anyone make you do things you don't want to do?" Jamie tilted his head in confusion. "Make me do what? I mean, does anyone force you to do anything? Does anyone make you afraid?" Jamie shook his head immediately. "No, ma'am. Dad Maxwell is very good to me. He never yells at me. He reads to me every night. He taught me how to ride a bike. He tucks me in every night and makes sure I have a warm coat so I'm never cold anymore." Jamie laughed softly at that. Josephine did not laugh. She studied him carefully. "You call him Dad?" Jamie nodded. "Yes, ma'am. He's my dad. Where did you live before coming here?" Jamie lowered his gaze, his small fingers twisting the hem of his shirt. "I lived outside," he said quietly. "After my mom died, I slept in an alley behind a restaurant. I found food in trash cans." Josephine stopped writing. She simply looked at him. That detail had not been included in the anonymous report. After speaking with Jamie, Josephine requested a private meeting with Maxwell. They sat across from one another in his office, her eyes locked onto his without hesitation. "What do you do for a living, Mr. Thornton?" "Real estate investment," Maxwell replied calmly. "My tax records are fully transparent. You're welcome to verify them." Josephine gave no visible reaction. She watched him for a long moment, as if trying to see beyond his composed exterior. "We will verify everything," she said at last. "Everything." Maxwell knew she doubted him. He could read it in her eyes, in the way she emphasized that word. She didn't trust him, and he couldn't blame her. The child may remain here temporarily, Josephine said as she stood. But we will continue monitoring. There will be additional visits, additional interviews. I hope you understand that our only concern is the child's safety. I understand, Maxwell answered, and I assure you, Jamie is safe here. This is his home. Josephine gave a brief nod and left with her staff, the penthouse settling into tense silence after the elevator doors closed. The moment they were gone, Jamie ran to Maxwell and threw his arms around him. "Did I do something wrong, Dad?" he asked anxiously. "She asked me so many questions." "Did I say something bad?" Maxwell knelt and held him tightly. "No," he said softly, though his heart felt heavy. "You did nothing wrong. You answered perfectly. I'm proud of you." But in the back of his mind, a quiet voice whispered, "They will return, and they won't stop until they find what they're looking for." 1 week after the inspection, Josephine Hartwell sat in her office, staring at a new envelope that had just been placed on her desk. Another anonymous report. She opened it and read slowly, her sharp eyes moving across each line. This time it was far more detailed. Maxwell Thornton is not merely a real estate businessman. He is the Wolf, the most powerful mafia boss in Chicago. He is connected to illegal operations, though never formally charged. The child is living with a dangerous criminal. Josephine lowered the paper and folded her hands together. There was no concrete evidence, no criminal record, no conviction. But she had done this work for 30 years. She knew there were truths that never appeared on official documents. She knew there were dangerous men who stood in daylight while living entirely in shadow. She was not a judge. She did not have the authority to declare anyone guilty. But she had a duty to protect children. And if there was any risk, even the possibility of risk, she was obligated to act. That was her job. That was why she existed within the system. Josephine picked up the phone and called Harrison Price. "Mr. Price," she said when he answered, "I have made a decision. We need to place Jamie in temporary protective custody while we conduct further investigation into Mr. Thornton." Harrison was silent for a moment, then his voice tightened. "Miss Hartwell, you have no evidence of harm to the child. Your own inspection confirmed that he is well cared for." "I have sufficient reasonable concern," Josephine replied evenly. "The reports regarding Mr. Thornton's alleged past, the persistent rumors about his activities, all of it forms a picture I cannot ignore. The law allows me to remove a child from a potentially dangerous environment, pending investigation. And that is what I will do." Harrison knew she was correct. Legally, she had the authority. Reasonable concern was enough. He couldn't block her. Not now. "We will arrive this afternoon," Josephine said before ending the call. Harrison stared at his phone briefly, then immediately dialed Maxwell. "Sir, there's bad news," he said the moment Maxwell answered. "Josephine Hartwell just called. They're coming this afternoon to take Jamie." Silence followed. The silence stretched so long Harrison wondered if the call had dropped. Then Maxwell's voice came through, low and dangerous, like the growl of a wolf before it strikes. "No, sir," Harrison said quickly, understanding he needed to steady this before it spiraled. "I know what you're feeling, but if you resist, you give them exactly what they need. They'll say you're violent, unstable, a threat to the child. You will lose him permanently. Is that what you want?" Maxwell did not respond. He stood in his office, gripping the phone so tightly the casing creaked. Every instinct in him demanded action. Find whoever sent the anonymous reports. Deal with Josephine Hartwell. Use his power and resources to crush anyone who dared threaten his son. That was how the Wolf handled problems. That was how he had survived his entire life. Conrad entered the office. One look at Maxwell's expression telling him everything. "Sir," he said firmly, "I know you want to handle this the old way, but this isn't a gang war. This isn't an enemy you can intimidate or buy off. This is the court system, the law. You can't win this with force." Maxwell looked at Conrad, eyes cold but carrying a pain he refused to show. "If you want to keep the boy," Conrad continued, "you have to play by their rules. You have to prove you're not the man they think you are. And you can't do that if you act like the Wolf." Maxwell closed his eyes, gripping the edge of his desk until his knuckles whitened. From the next room, he could hear Jamie laughing, playing with the teddy bear Maggie had bought him. The boy had no idea a storm was coming. He didn't know that in a few hours the life he had only just begun to trust might be torn away. Maxwell remembered his promise. "I'll give you the life you deserve. I'll protect you. He couldn't break that promise by becoming exactly what they feared. He couldn't prove them right. Maxwell opened his eyes. The wildness was gone, replaced by resolve. Let them come, he said quietly but firmly. But prepare everything. Harrison, I want every legal option pursued. Conrad, I want everything smooth when they arrive. No incidents, no reason for further suspicion. Both men nodded. I will get my son back, Maxwell said, the words like a vow carved in stone, by their rules. Then he left the office and walked toward Jamie's room. He had to tell his son what was about to happen. And it was the hardest thing Maxwell Thornton had ever faced in his life. Maxwell stood at the doorway of Jamie's room, watching the boy sitting on the floor talking to his teddy bear. Jamie was telling the bear about tomorrow, about how he wanted to go to the park, about what Maggie might cook for dinner. He had no idea his world was about to break apart. Maxwell drew a slow breath, steadying his voice, then stepped inside. Jamie, can you come here for a minute? Jamie looked up, eyes bright, and sprang to his feet. Dad, do you want to play with me? I can teach you how to talk to Teddy. He likes stories. Maxwell knelt so they were eye level. He took Jamie's small hands in his own, feeling their warmth and softness. I need to tell you something important. Jamie studied his face, and the smile faded. He had lived on the streets long enough to recognize when adults were about to say something bad. His father's eyes weren't cold now. They were hurting, and that frightened him more than anything. What's wrong, Dad? Maxwell squeezed his hands, as if trying to give the boy strength, or perhaps to borrow some himself. Some people are coming, he said carefully. They say you have to go with them for a little while. Jamie's eyes widened, fear flooding his small face. Go where? I don't want to go. I want to stay here with you. I know, Maxwell said, his voice unsteady. I don't want you to go either. I want you here forever. But if I try to keep you, they'll say I'm a bad man, and then they won't let you come back at all. Ever. You're not bad, Jamie cried, tears spilling down his cheeks. You're the best. You taught me to ride a bike. You cook eggs even when they burn. You read to me every night. You're my dad. Maxwell's throat tightened. He had faced enemies and death without flinching, but nothing had prepared him for this. I know, he whispered, but I have to prove it to them. And to prove it, you have to go for a little while. Just a little while. Then I'll bring you home. Jamie sobbed openly now. I don't want to go back to the street. I don't want to sleep on cardboard. I don't want to be hungry again. I don't want to be alone. I want you. Maxwell pulled him into his arms, holding him as if it might be the last time. You won't go back to the street, he said, voice trembling but resolute. You'll be somewhere safe, with a warm bed and food, and I will come for you. I promise. Jamie lifted his tear-stained face. You promise? You won't leave me? You won't disappear like Mom? Maxwell felt his heart tear open. He brushed away Jamie's tears gently. With everything I am, he said firmly, I will come for you, no matter what it takes. The doorbell rang, shattering the moment. Maxwell closed his eyes briefly, then stood, still holding Jamie's hand. They're here. Josephine Hartwell entered with her staff, composed and professional. Maxwell looked at her. There was no trace of the wolf in his eyes now, only a father's pain. Promise me, he said quietly. He will be treated well. That is our duty, Mr. Thornton, Josephine replied. He will be cared for properly. Jamie clung to Maxwell's leg, crying, Dad, please, don't let them take me. Maxwell knelt again and held Jamie's shoulders, looking into those tear-filled eyes. Jamie, listen to me. I love you. I love you more than anything in this world, and I will do whatever it takes to bring you home. Do you remember our place? The bench under the oak tree in the park? Jamie nodded through his tears. That's where I met you. Yes. I'll be waiting for you there when this is over. We'll go home together. Can you be brave for me? I'm proud of you. Jamie hugged him one last time, small arms wrapped tightly around his neck. I love you, Dad, he whispered. I love you, Maxwell answered, his voice breaking. The staff gently separated them. Jamie tried to be brave as he had been asked, but tears continued to fall as they led him toward the door. He turned back one last time before entering the elevator. Green eyes met gray. Then the doors closed. Jamie was gone. Maxwell stood by the window as the child protection vehicle pulled away from the building. He watched it grow smaller and smaller, until it disappeared behind the tall Chicago buildings. He didn't chase it. He didn't shout. He simply stood there in silence, like stone. Maggie wept quietly nearby. Conrad watched from a distance with an expression he had never worn before. In 20 years, he had never seen his boss like this. Not a wounded wolf. A father who had just lost his son. The vehicle vanished from sight. Maxwell remained still a moment longer, staring at the empty space it had left behind. Then he turned. His eyes were dry but hard as steel. The pain had been compressed into something colder. "Summon everyone," he said, voice low and firm. "We have work to do." This was no longer the wolf defending territory or empire. This was a father preparing to reclaim his son. 3 weeks had passed since the day Jamie was taken away. 3 weeks in which Maxwell hadn't slept through a single night, hadn't enjoyed a single meal, hadn't lived a single moment without thinking of the boy with the green eyes. But instead of letting the pain drown him, he turned it into fuel. He summoned Harrison and Conrad to the penthouse and sat in his study with the expression of a man who had made the most important decision of his life. "Tell me exactly what I have to do to adopt Jamie legally," he said, his voice low and unwavering. "Don't leave out a single detail." Harrison opened his case file and began. "To qualify for adoption, you need a completely clean record, no criminal history, transparent and lawful income, a stable and safe home environment. You must prove you can care for the child financially, emotionally, and psychologically. They'll run background checks, investigate your past, interview people around you. Everything has to be flawless." Maxwell listened without interruption. When Harrison finished, he rose and walked to the window, looking out over Chicago. "Transfer all underground operations to Conrad," he said evenly. "My name must not appear in any documents connected to them. Everything goes to him. Completely." Conrad stood abruptly, eyes wide. "Sir, this is your empire. You built it over 20 years. Your power, your wealth, your influence, all of it came from that empire. You can't." Maxwell turned and met Conrad's gaze. "An empire doesn't hold me when I'm hurting," he said quietly, but the weight in his voice was immense. "An empire doesn't call me dad. An empire doesn't look at me with eyes and say I'm the best man in the world. I've had everything an empire can give. Money, power, fear. But I've never had a family, never had someone truly love me. Not until Jamie." He paused and drew a breath. "I choose my son, and I will do whatever it takes to bring him home." In the weeks that followed, Maxwell Thornton became a different man. He attended parenting classes, sitting among ordinary mothers and fathers, listening to lectures about child psychology, communication, trust building. At first, the others stared at the tall man with the scar and the cold eyes, but gradually they saw him taking notes carefully, asking thoughtful questions, listening with genuine attention. He began therapy sessions, and for the first time in his life, he spoke about his childhood in the orphanage, about growing up without love, about becoming the cold man he had been. The therapist listened without judgment, and Maxwell realized that speaking those truths didn't make him weak. Harrison worked day and night, restructuring Maxwell's holdings. Every shadowed enterprise was transferred into Conrad's name. Maxwell retained only legitimate businesses, real estate, investments, ventures that could prove lawful income. He lost money, he lost power, he lost influence in the underworld, but he gained something more important, a clean record. Meanwhile, at the temporary facility, Jamie sat by the window and watched the sky. The place was clean, the staff kind. No one hurt him, no one neglected him. But Jamie didn't speak. He didn't play with the other children. He didn't laugh. He didn't join activities. He sat by the window for hours, eyes distant. At night, after the others slept, he lay in bed staring through the glass, searching for his mother's star. He whispered to it, telling her about Dad Maxwell, about how much he missed him, about how he was waiting to be taken home. In his pocket he kept 2 treasures, a worn photograph of his mother, and a small piece of paper with Maxwell's phone number written by hand, along with the words, "If you need anything, call Dad." Staff reported to Josephine. "The boy hasn't been happy since arriving," they said. "He doesn't cause trouble. He doesn't misbehave. But he's like a shadow. He's just existing, not really living. He's waiting for someone." Once a week, Maxwell was allowed a supervised 1-hour visit. Each time Jamie saw him walk in, the boy leapt to his feet and ran into his arms. "Dad, you really came. I missed you." Maxwell held him tightly, unwilling to let go, feeling the small body trembling against his chest. "I promised," he said softly. "I'm doing everything I can. I'm bringing you home." "I know you will," Jamie answered, looking up with unwavering eyes. "I'll wait. I'll wait as long as it takes." The hour passed cruelly fast. When it was time to say goodbye, Jamie didn't cry like the first time. He had learned strength. He had learned patience. He simply squeezed Maxwell's hand and said, "Don't forget the bench under the oak tree. Our place." "I won't forget," Maxwell replied, his voice steady as an oath. From a distance, Josephine watched. She saw change. The cold, intimidating crime lord she had expected wasn't there. The man before her was gentle, patient, loving with the child. Harrison's documentation was thorough, showing restructuring, lawful income, lifestyle change. Yet Josephine remained cautious. 30 years in her profession had taught her that people could perform beautifully. The question was whether this was truth or theater. 2 weeks before the final hearing, Harrison called. "The court date is set," he said. 2 weeks from now. Everything depends on that day." Maxwell stood by the penthouse window, watching Chicago sink into sunset. "I'm ready," he said. And he was. Ready to fight for his son. Not with guns, not with the power of the wolf, but by proving he was worthy of being a father. The day of the final hearing arrived like a turning point written by fate. Maxwell woke before dawn, not because he had slept well, but because he couldn't lie still another second. He stood before the bathroom mirror, studying his reflection, the faint scar along his jaw, the gray eyes that no longer carried the same coldness they once had. He chose a light gray suit instead of his usual commanding black, trying to appear as unthreatening as possible. When Maxwell entered the Child Protective Services building, he came alone. No bodyguards, no entourage, no display of power. Only Harrison Price walked beside him, carrying a thick briefcase filled with documentation proving Maxwell's transformation over the past weeks. He was not the wolf today. He was simply a man asking to be a father. The hearing room was modest but formal. Josephine Hartwell sat at the head of the table, 2 other board members beside her. Maxwell and Harrison sat opposite them. Behind Maxwell were the individuals prepared to testify on his behalf. He felt the tension in the air, sensed the measured glances directed at him, yet he remained steady. He had faced countless trials in his life, but this was the first time he truly feared losing. Harrison began the presentation, methodical and precise. Transparent financial records demonstrating that Mr. Thornton's income derived entirely from lawful enterprises, primarily real estate investments, all audited and verified. Certificates showing Maxwell's completion of parenting courses, reports from his therapist, photographs of Jamie's bedroom in the penthouse, furnished, warm, filled with books and toys. A written statement from Margaret Chen detailing Jamie's daily routine while living with Mr. Thornton. Josephine listened without expression. When Harrison finished, she turned her gaze directly to Maxwell. "Mr. Thornton," she said evenly, "we've reviewed your file, but I need to ask you directly. We're aware of your reputation, the rumors, the stories. Do you wish to address that?" The room fell silent. All eyes shifted to Maxwell. He could deny everything. He could deflect. He could let Harrison respond. Instead, he spoke himself. "I'm not perfect," he said quietly. "I have a past. I've done things I'm not proud of. I won't stand here and claim I'm a good man, because I don't know if I am." He paused, drawing a steady breath. "But I want a different future. Not for me, for Jamie. That boy looks at me with clear eyes and believes I'm good. He calls me dad like it's the most natural thing in the world. He isn't afraid of me. He doesn't want anything from me except love. And I want to deserve the way he looks at me. I want to become the man he already believes I am." Josephine wrote something down, her face unreadable. She called the first witness. Maggie stepped forward, her reddish-brown hair neatly styled, her expression calm but firm. "I've worked for Mr. Thornton for years," she began. "I've seen him change completely since Jamie came into his life. Before, he came home late. Ate alone, lived alone. After Jamie, he came home early. He ate dinner with the boy, read to him every night. He spends his evenings helping the boy with his schoolwork, learning how to be a father 1 page at a time. I've never seen Mr. Thornton happy until Jamie. That's the truth." Next came Tommy Jung's father, confident and composed. "My son and Jamie are close friends," he said. I've observed Jamie many times. He's polite, grateful for the smallest kindness. He speaks about his father with love in his eyes. Whatever the rumors about Mr. Thornton, what I see is a father who loves his child. Conrad was the final witness. I've worked beside Mr. Thornton for 20 years, he said steadily. I know him better than anyone. And I tell you this, I've never seen him as he's been these past months. He's willing to give up everything for that boy. Everything he built in a lifetime. That isn't performance. No one could fake that. Josephine nodded and signaled to the technician. A screen flickered on, and Jamie's face appeared. The recorded interview had been conducted privately, without Maxwell present, to ensure the child could speak freely. Maxwell's chest tightened at the sight of his son, Jamie somewhere in this city, waiting. Jamie, Josephine's recorded voice asked gently, can you tell us who you want to live with? Jamie looked directly into the camera, eyes wide and steady. I want to go home with Dad Maxwell, he said clearly. He taught me how to ride a bike. He reads to me every night. He hugs me when I miss my mom. He stays with me until I fall asleep when I have bad dreams, and he never gets tired of my questions. He paused, thinking carefully. Dad says he'll never leave me, and he keeps his promises. He visits me every week. He says he's doing everything he can to bring me home. I believe him. I want to go home. The screen went dark. Silence filled the room. Maxwell felt his eyes sting, but he held himself together. He didn't want to break here. Yet hearing Jamie's faith, knowing the boy still trusted him, touched the deepest part of him. Josephine looked at Maxwell for a long moment, then at the blank screen. She rose slowly. We need to deliberate, she said. The decision will be announced today. Please wait outside. Maxwell stepped into the hallway and sat down, Harrison beside him, and he waited. It was the longest hour of his life, longer than any negotiation, longer than any battle, because this time he wasn't fighting for an empire, for money, or for power. He was fighting for his son. 2 hours passed like 2 years. Maxwell sat in the hallway, back straight, while his mind churned without mercy. He had faced the most dangerous enemies, negotiated deals worth millions without a tremor in his voice, yet he had never felt tension like this. Harrison sat beside him, glancing at his watch now and then, but he knew better than to speak. Then the conference room door opened. A staff member stepped out and motioned for them to come in. Maxwell rose. Harrison followed. He entered the room and felt the air pulled tight as wire. Josephine Hartwell sat at the head of the table, her expression as unreadable as ever. The other board members remained silent, their eyes neutral, assessing. Maxwell stood, waiting. Mr. Thornton, Josephine began, her voice steady and serious. I'll be honest with you. When I first received this file, I believed it was straightforward. A man with your reputation seeking custody of an orphaned child. I assumed there must be questionable motives. I expected to find something wrong. Something proving the child wasn't safe with you. Maxwell said nothing. His heart pounded so hard he thought the room might hear it. He couldn't tell whether her words were leading toward hope or toward ruin. But after 5 weeks of investigation, Josephine continued, and her tone softened. I found something else. I found a child who had lived on the streets, who had lost his mother and survived alone in an alley, who for the first time was truly loved. I found a boy who hadn't smiled for 5 weeks in temporary care, yet whose eyes lit up every time you visited. I found a man willing to change his entire life, to give up everything he built for a child he met in a park. She paused and looked directly into his eyes. And I found a child who does not want to live anywhere else but in your home. Silence filled the room. Maxwell felt his heartbeat thunder in his chest. Josephine stood, holding a document. Custody of Jamie Reeves is granted to Maxwell Thornton, she read clearly and formally. A probationary period of 6 months will apply. Upon successful completion, the adoption may be finalized. She placed the paper down and met his gaze. Congratulations, Mr. Thornton. Don't disappoint me. Maxwell stood frozen. He tried to speak, but no words came. His throat closed, and all he could do was nod. Harrison gripped his shoulder from behind. You did it, he whispered. You did it. Maxwell turned to the man who had stood beside him through everything, who had worked tirelessly to build a flawless case. Thank you, he managed, his voice rough. 2 simple words that had never felt heavier. An hour later, the black Mercedes S-Class pulled up outside the temporary facility. Maxwell stepped out, and walked faster than usual, his heart pounding. The doors opened, and there stood Jamie, dressed in the clothes Maxwell had bought him, eyes wide with disbelief. 1 second of silence, one suspended breath. Then Jamie ran. He ran as fast as he could, across the yard, straight into Maxwell's arms. "Dad!" he shouted, his voice breaking with joy. "You came!" "You really came for me." Maxwell dropped to his knees and gathered the boy up, lifting him as though he were the most precious thing in the world. To him, he was. "I keep my promises," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I told you I would bring you home, and I did." Jamie clung to his neck, burying his face against his shoulder. He cried, but these were tears of joy, the tears of a child finally going home. Then he pulled back and looked at Maxwell's face, and he saw something he had never seen before. Tears. Tears running down the cheeks of the man he called Dad. "Dad," Jamie whispered, surprised and worried. "Why are you crying? Are you okay?" Maxwell laughed, the brightest smile he had ever worn breaking through the tears. "Because I'm happy," he said softly. "Because of you. I'm crying because I'm too happy." It was the first time in Maxwell Thornton's life that he cried not from pain, not from loss, not from anger, but from happiness, from love, from finally having what he had longed for without even knowing it. A family. Jamie reached up with his small hand and gently wiped the tears from Maxwell's cheek. "I'm happy for you too," he said, smiling wide. "I love you." "I love you," Maxwell answered, holding him close again. They got into the car, and the entire ride home Jamie refused to let go of his hand. He sat pressed against him, fingers intertwined, as though afraid that if he loosened his grip, everything would dissolve like a dream. "Dad," Jamie said softly, contentment in his voice, "we're going home." Maxwell looked down into the eyes filled with trust and love. He squeezed the boy's hand and smiled. "Yes," he said, his voice warmer than it had ever been. "We're going home." 6 months passed like a beautiful dream neither Maxwell nor Jamie wanted to wake from. 6 months of waking up together in the morning, of warm dinners at the table, of bedtime stories read in a steady, patient voice. 6 months of laughter filling a penthouse that had once felt cold and hollow. 6 months of innocent questions and thoughtful answers. 6 months in which Maxwell learned how to be a father, and Jamie learned that happiness could last. And today, everything would become official. The government building stood solemn beneath the golden light of autumn. Maxwell and Jamie walked inside, hand in hand, both dressed carefully for this day. Maxwell chose a deep blue suit instead of black. Jamie wore the light blue shirt he loved, the first shirt Maxwell had bought him when he moved into the penthouse. They sat in the judge's office, Harrison beside them with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had completed the most meaningful work of his career. Maggie and Conrad were there too, seated behind them as witnesses to this moment. The judge, a middle-aged man with silver hair and kind eyes, reviewed the file one last time and set down his pen. He looked at Maxwell, then at Jamie, and smiled. "I've reviewed this case for 6 months," he said warmly. "I've read every report from Child Protective Services, from the therapist, from the school, and I'm pleased to say this is one of the most beautiful cases I've ever seen." He lifted his pen and signed the final document with deliberate care. "Jamie," he said gently, "from today forward, Maxwell Thornton is your legal father. You are officially Jamie Thornton." Jamie beamed, eyes shining like bright jewels. He squeezed Maxwell's hand and said proudly, "I already knew. He's always been my dad, since the day he taught me to ride a bike in the park." The room filled with warm laughter. Maxwell signed the papers, his hand trembling slightly, not from fear but from emotion. When he set the pen down, he knew his life had changed forever, and he felt no regret. They walked out of the government building, the autumn air crisp and clear. With the legal papers tucked safely in his briefcase, Maxwell led Jamie into a large bicycle shop. "Today, you can choose any bike you want," he said. Jamie's eyes widened. He moved past rows of shiny frames before stopping in front of a blue bicycle with a golden bell. "Because blue is the color of the sky," Jamie whispered, looking up at his father. "I'm free now, Dad." They returned to Grant Park, the place where a rusty bike and a simple question had changed their fates. As Maxwell watched Jamie ride his new blue bicycle under the golden autumn leaves, he realized he had found something greater than power or empire. He had found a reason to be a better man. One day had become a lifetime, and for the first time, the wolf wasn't alone. He was home. This story offers a profound reminder about the value of family and love. No matter who you are, no matter your past, you can change. You can love and be loved. Sometimes the most precious things in life don't come from money or power, but from sincere human connection. An orphan child taught the most powerful man in the city what true happiness means, and a man who believed he had lost the ability to love found his heart again through a simple question. If this story touched you, please consider subscribing and turning on notifications so you won't miss our next stories. Like this video to help it reach more people, and share it with those you love, those who believe in change and second chances. How did this story make you feel? Have you ever met someone who changed your life unexpectedly? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We would truly love to hear your reflections, your own stories about family, love, and the moments that transformed your life. Thank you for spending your time with us today. We wish you health, joy, happiness, and peace each day. Remember that family is both the beginning and the end of every journey, and love is the greatest gift we can give and receive. Goodbye for now, and we'll see you in the next story.